Another question is, what does R mean? When I calculate the correlation between two variables, what does this number mean? So in the previous video, we just took our numbers for our time spent studying and quiz score and calculated our correlation all by hand. But we ended up with this number about 0.929. But what the heck does that mean? So I talked about this briefly in class, but remember that the correlation is always going to take on a value between -1 and 1. When it's closer to 1, that means that the data is more closely correlated together. But when it's closer to 0, that means it's less closely correlated. And whenever we get products of 0, it's going to make those much less. But like, and if you like this, I think this slide, and this is one of the slides we looked at, and it was actually from our text, makes it a little bit easier to see how what this calculation actually comes out with. But when it's closer to the value of 1, like in these last two diagrams, you're going to see data that's all relatively linear, that's on a free-flowing line. When the correlation is more like half, it's sort of like a percentage, like 0.5. The data is sort of like roughly in a line, 50%. Whereas when the correlation is 0, it's not at all related, basically saying there is 0% correlation here. And when you have, say, 0.9 or 0.99, it's 99% correlation, very, very strong. And remember that correlation can come out to be negative when you have a negative trend. So you should expect negative numbers quite frequently when it comes towards data which is correlating down to the right with a negative slope versus up to the right with a positive slope. So with all of this in mind, we can see, well, does this answer make sense? We see that there's a pretty strong correlation, about 0.93, very close to 1, which is very strong. And if we go back and look at our scatter plot, the data did seem to flow in a line. We weren't really sure about how closely it was, but it gives us a mathematical measure of how closely this data is correlated. And notice that we got a positive number because we had a positive slope, a positive trend. If our data was facing the other way, we should expect to see negative correlation come through after all is said and done.